Welcome everyone to OTF Connect's webinar, Is it Misbehavior or Stress Behavior? Brought to you by Becky and Crystal. We are really lucky to have this one. The timing is perfect. December happens to be a pretty busy time. I'm thrilled to welcome Becky and Crystal from the Simcoe area. I believe they're up near Barrie. I've been checking their resources, and these two are quite the dynamo. They have a wonderful Twitter account going and lots of things to share with you tonight. Very timely topic. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Becky and Crystal.
Good evening, everyone. We're happy to be with you tonight. That was a very kind introduction. We're looking forward to talking about self-regulation with you this evening for sure. Our role at the Simcoe County District School Board is the early years facilitators, which we are enjoying getting to work with all of the early years educators that we have in our school board. And we have a real passion for self-regulation. Crystal, who will do much of the talking this evening, actually is being certified through the Merit Center. And I'm working on my certificate as well as a result of her learning. So we are really pumped and excited to share that with you tonight. So we will get started.
Okay, so the slide you're looking at here has a cute little comic on it. It says, what makes you think I need a stress workshop? And we really wanted to think about why is teaching so stressful? So through some of our learning with the Merit Center, we've had a chance to look at a few studies. There was a study done back a few years ago by the Center of Applied Research on Mental Health and Addiction at Simon Fraser University, and they were looking at stress in the workplace. They had a look at a number of domains, including a special report on stress and teaching. And one of the findings they had was that 10% of teachers in the province would experience depression in the course of every year. And that's a really high percentage of our teachers within the province. Additionally, in 2012, almost 90% of all Toronto students in grades 7 through 12 participated in a study exploring how students feel about their in and out of school experiences and their general well-being. And the study revealed that 63% of grades 7 and 8 students and 72% of those in high school reported feeling nervous or anxious often or all of the time. So if we really think about that, that means that about 25% of all students in Toronto are doing okay. And those numbers are really off in my mind. There are various aspects at work that seem to be having this negative impact on student well-being and our own well-being. And we're facing challenges in this society that we have never faced before. And we as teachers are having a really hard time keeping up with these challenges. I know that we all understand the impact of well-being on student achievement. However, we are not mental health professionals, and I feel like this simple fact has left many of us feeling undertrained and unable to deal with the problems of today's society, which is adding to our personal stress levels.
And who wouldn't want all of our children to be in an optimal state of mind? Who wouldn't want them to be calm and alert and ready to learn? So it's a priority for us, for all of us. We want, especially as early years educators, but as all educators, we want children to be able to do the best they can and to be able to access the best learning that we can. So what we're going to go into are the systems in our brain that help us to understand stress and deal with stress.
So we're really in the midst of one of the most exciting and profound revolutions that we've ever seen in our understanding of how to enhance healthy student development and personal well-being. Scientists have uncovered the fundamental importance of self-reg on our overall well-being, and it's really changing the way that we view behavior. So in times past, we viewed our brains functioning within like a higher order system, with the prefrontal cortex or the higher order system being in charge of the limbic system or the lower order system. And this belief, unfortunately, has translated into some really deeply ingrained philosophies of willpower. The idea that when we give in to our desires It's because our PFC, our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, is too weak to inhibit the strong impulses that are emanating from our limbic system. But one of the modern breakthroughs in science of self-reg is the discovery of the complex operations of the limbic system. And we're going to get into that a little bit. But I'd like to start by just quickly going over the diagram you're looking at right now. So what you are seeing is referred to as the evolution design brain. And the evolutionary brain, we like to think of it as composed as three main systems. Now, this is really just an analogy. Our brain is not actually three separate systems. It's one giant system that's interconnected to work together. But each of the parts of the brain plays a very specific role that works with the other parts of the brain in order to make us who we are. So these three parts have evolved at different times in our past, and they're kind of layered on top of each other. So the neocortex, or the blue part of the brain that you're looking at, that's the newest part of our brain. And it's responsible for supporting higher order functions, things like language, thinking, being able to mind read other people's emotional cues, and self-control. Underneath that is a much older, what is referred to as a paleo-mammalian brain, and that houses the limbic system and strong emotional associations and urges. And then the brown part you're looking at the very bottom is the very oldest and most primitive part of our brain, and that works really closely with the limbic system to regulate arousal and alertness. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick overview of the role of each part of the brain. So what you're looking at now, the brown part of the brain, we refer to as, at the Merit Center and in Shanker Self-Reg, we refer to it as the reptilian brain. And this is the most primitive part of the brain. It is referred to as the reptilian brain because it includes the same structures that you would find in a reptile's brain. And if we think about the existence of reptiles, it makes it a little easier for us to relate to the operations of this part of the brain. So if we think about a reptile, let's think of an alligator or a turtle, it will lay its eggs and bury them and then disappear. And then those babies hatch all on their own, and then they head out, and their entire life is concerned with survival. They're not really social beings. They are primarily only concerned with survival, and this part of the brain does the same thing. It controls our body's vital functions like our heart rate, our breathing, body temperature, balance, reproduction, and restoration, which is the balancing of energy in and energy out. All right, so this next part of the brain is really where a lot of the modern breakthroughs in science have come from. As I said earlier, up until the last, I would say within the last 10 years, we could really only scan the prefrontal cortex and weren't actually able to get deep enough to see the limbic system. And now that we are, we're finding out a whole lot about this system. So the limbic system lies below the prefrontal cortex. Its main structures are the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. So the amygdala is the source of our strong emotions and urges, and it plays a really critical role in the formation of our memories and then the emotional associations that we attach to those memories. And those emotional associations are stored in the hippocampus. So when we have had an extreme emotion, whether it be positive or negative, the amygdala and the hippocampus work together to store a memory of what happened, but also the feeling that was associated with that, and that helps us be able to predict threat and non-threat. As I said, positive as well as negative emotions have a neurobiological home base here. So it's really those super strong emotions like love, desire, fear, shame, anger, and trauma. The hypothalamus, it oversees our internal regulation. For example, making sure our body temperature is close to 37 degrees. It also ensures that we have the right amount of things like sodium and glucose in the bloodstream, and that during sleep, some of our systems are resting while others are making repairs and promoting healing. So the limbic system is referred to as the paleo-mammalian brain because it evolved with mammals. When we think about mammals, we are by nature very social creatures, and from birth, we need some period of very protective nurturing in order to survive. So with this kind of reliance on others, we needed a way to be able to sense whether the others were friend or foe. And that function is what we refer to as limbic resonance. It really is like a brain-to-brain connection. So to give you an example of that, if you're in a room with somebody who's annoyed with you and you can sense that, that's limbic resonance. Or if you are in your classroom and somebody were to walk up to you and just start yelling at you, immediately our bodies go into like a defensive mode, and that is our limbic resonance, our limbic brain's responding to somebody else's limbic brain. So it really is a limbic to limbic connection. When a baby laughs, you laugh. So this function is really crucial for us being able to kind of intuitively know what each other is thinking and help us sense whether the social being around us is a threat or not. In addition to sensing social threats, the limbic system is also constantly scanning the environment for environmental threats. So it's working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, scanning social beings and environments for signs of threat, and when it senses danger, it'll send a signal to the other parts of the brain, and that we become very hyper alert, almost like a deer caught in the headlights. And if that danger is confirmed, and whether it's real or perceived, because the limbic system is not able to tell the difference between a real threat or a perceived threat. So if that danger is confirmed in that person's brain, the limbic system will send a signal to our stress response system to prepare for survival. And we know this system as the fight or flight system.
Exactly, Melanie.
So what the neurochemicals do is they raise your heart rate, they raise your blood pressure, the rate of your breathing will increase so you can deliver glucose and oxygen to the major muscle systems, and your energy surges to prepare you for that fight or flight response. It's also metabolizing fat from your fatty cells. It's metabolizing glucose from your liver to produce that extra energy. Your alertness and reactivity increase, which is costing us extra energy. And you'll notice those things like pupil dilation, or your hair will stand on end, or you'll notice you'll start sweating, or you'll feel the endorphins are released and get this rush within your body. And this reaction is exactly what we would need in a dangerous situation that demands a quick response. We know this response is fight or flight, and this alarm system is so primitive, and it is really, really energy expensive. It drains us completely. And in order for us to have enough energy for this continual heightened stress response, the hypothalamus will shut down whatever other functions are consuming energy but are not necessary for survival. And that will come into play when we talk about the prefrontal cortex. So a couple of things that's important to note before we move on is that the limbic system is unconsciously scanning for social and environmental threats 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, as far as the limbic system is concerned, there's no difference between a real threat or a perceived threat. And then another thing that's important to note, that once the stress response system is active, you will stay in a state of heightened alert for about 4 to 6 hours, because if we were living in primitive times and you were being stalked by a saber-toothed tiger, as soon as that tiger leaves, you're not going to be ready to go to bed, because if you fall asleep and that tiger comes back, you're probably in a little bit of trouble.
And we're going to talk briefly about the implications for video gaming and how that affects our limbic system and keeps us in that fight or flight mode for extended periods of time. We'll get into that soon.
Okay, so the top part of the brain, the neocortex, or we would refer to it as the new brain, it is the most recent part of our brain to evolve. They estimate it evolved maybe 3 or 4 million years ago, and it's gone through several modifications throughout this time. It gets bigger and more complex with each human species. This part of the brain originally evolved with our early primates, but like I said, it's become much more evolved in us as human beings. The front part of the neocortex, which is called the prefrontal cortex, it gets bigger and more powerful with each new human species. It's referred to as the learning brain. And the reason we refer to this as the learning brain is because this part of the brain is what's responsible for all of those higher order functions, the development of language, abstract thought, imagination, consciousness, and most importantly for self-regulation. Self-control is very much a new brain or blue brain phenomenon. If you are in a limbic state of arousal, you are going to have much less energy to be able to push through to your learning brain. And in fact, if you are in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, you can actually hijack, the limbic system will actually hijack the prefrontal cortex. And we're going to get into some of the effects of that as we go through the presentation.
So Kathleen, yes, your brain, in a sense, your brain does become full. It's more that the limbic system has taken over the other, the blue brain. And then Melanie as well, absolutely, that's the biggest part. And we're really going to get into that in terms of self-regulation. Yes, we perceive danger where there actually is none, and that's one of the biggest reasons for why we need self-regulation. So what is stress? We all know what stress is and can identify the things that regularly stress us out in our daily lives, but we often underestimate the complexity and amount of stress we deal with on a daily basis. In order to properly understand the concept of self-regulation, I want to start by reviewing the Self-Reg definition of stress. Back in the 1920s, an American physiologist named Walter Cannon developed the concept of homeostasis, so how an organism burns energy in order to maintain a stable internal environment. What Cannon discovered is that every organism has a set base point regulated by a number of cooperative mechanisms or internal systems. So stress or stressors are anything that disrupts that base point and requires us to burn energy to get back to base. So let me give you an example. Think about your home heating system. Let's suppose we set our thermostat in our home to 20 degrees. This thermostat clicks on when the temperature drops to about 17 degrees, and it will click off when it rises above 22, so to maintain that stable internal environment. Same for air conditioning. It turns on as soon as your home is too warm in order to help to bring it back to base. So let's apply the same concept to our bodies. We have an internal temperature of about 37 degrees, and like a home furnace, if our body temperature drops too low, our brain sends signals to the body that are designed to generate heat. For example, our teeth chatter or we start to shiver, we get goosebumps. And then when the body gets too hot, the brain sends signals to cool it down. So we sweat or we sit down. In order to do this, our body is burning energy. So this applies to everything we do, from basic survival like breathing or digestion to higher order operations such as thinking and speaking. And yes, absolutely, TV, 100% total stressor. Oh my goodness.
Yes, yes. Okay, so what we have here is a really nice video that explains what happens to our body during a fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And we are going to use this to build off of throughout the rest of the presentation.
So, yes, thank you, Trish. It's about 3 minutes and 5 seconds long. So we're going to come back together at 7:54. So if you click on that link and go and watch the video, give us, using that check mark, if you can give us a check mark when you are ready to come back, then it'll be about 7:54 and we'll come back on together. So click on that link to watch the video, check mark when you're done.
Okay, hopefully you all had a chance to watch that. Melody, we did notice your comment about how you think it's interesting that they've added freeze now. I'd like to speak to that for a minute if I can. Oftentimes, we really notice the kids who are in fight and or flight. What we fail to notice is that some children, they do a freeze. You wouldn't really even notice that there's anything wrong with them. It's more of they tend to shut themselves down and be really, really quiet. So oftentimes we don't notice the students who are in freeze. They tend to be a little more quiet and less boisterous. So keeping that lens on and looking for those quieter kids who don't necessarily fight or flight, but there definitely is a freeze, and we see it a little more often than I'd like to wish we did. So going back to the fight, flight, or freeze activation, one of the things you will notice in that there is a lot of activity happening in your body when you go into a fight, flight, or freeze. And that means literally we are expending a whole bunch of energy when we are in a fight, flight, or freeze state. So what will happen is our body will compensate for that by shutting down other systems.
So as soon as you go into a fight or flight reaction, and Crystal, I'm not sure if this happens in freeze as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
so fight or freeze reaction. Some systems in your body are turned off. Or turned on. Sorry. Alertness and reactivity. You're more just more apt to be alert to the things around you. You're getting ready for danger. Your hair starts to stand on end. Endorphins are released. Your sweat glands are open, and you start to sweat. Your cortisol metabolizes fat from fatty cells and glucose from liver. And basically what that means is glucose is energy, so your body is expending a crazy amount of energy right away. Your adrenaline increases, and your heart rate starts to increase as well. And you know that happens when you get scared or when you're driving and all of a sudden the car in front of you stops. Just how we react, that happens right away. To me, it also happens when I'm driving in snowstorms. And all of a sudden, it feels so loud in my car if the radio is on and I have to turn it right off. There's other systems that get turned off in order for your body to put all the energy to saving yourself, really, is what it's coming down to. So digestion slows down, reproduction slows down, your immune system. So if we think about being caught in stress for a long period of time, that literally is affecting our health because our immune system shuts down. Cellular repair. The muscles in the middle ear constrict. And what that means is that when you are in a fight or flight reaction, you're stressed out, you literally can't hear that mid-range tone. So we think about our little kindergarten peanuts who are feeling stressed out and having a reaction, having a hard time, and we're trying to talk to them. They literally can't hear us. They can't hear those instructions or that conversation. And that really affects their ability to cope. So we need to work on bringing that stress down so that we can help them to be able to literally hear us again. The funny part about that too is that when I was working in the classroom, I had a male partner who had a very low voice. And so we always noticed that I never put this together until I started taking Self-Reg with Stuart Shanker, that whenever our students were having a hard time, he would get a better reaction from them when he went and sat down and talked to them. And that was because of that low, he had a very low, slow voice. So they were better able to access the things he was saying. And as well, as Crystal said earlier, your prefrontal cortex is turned off. Your learning brain is turned off. So if you are stressed out, you cannot learn. You're unable to learn. Your body is putting everything else in order to keep yourself safe.
There was a couple of questions while you were speaking, Becky. One was looking for a little bit more on freeze and what that might look like. Yeah. Kids who experience freeze often will they will hide or detach themselves from something. So you might even just see them sitting at a table with their head down, trying to avoid. But there's also, whenever somebody becomes aroused, whether they're having a fight, flight, or freeze reaction, there are a few things you can look for. Usually the timbre of their voice changes a little bit, so they go from a mid-tone voice. You'll notice the sound of their voice gets a little bit higher. They also speak in more of a staccato tone instead of a fluid tone. You can really tell usually by looking at pupils as well. Pupils will dilate in stress. So there are a few things you can look for those freezes, but it really is about knowing your children and knowing whether this is a typical behavior for them or not. And we are going to get into how do we manage self-regulation throughout the slides. So if we haven't answered that, we will spend some time at the end answering a little more clearly if we weren't clear enough.
And please make sure that we come back to that, because that's really is the goal of the session, is how do we balance that? How do we manage those things in our classroom? How do we recognize those things in the classroom so that we can give us tools to really change our classroom practice tomorrow? So please ask that again. I'm sorry, I moved it too fast.
That's great. So a really important thing for us to go over is allostatic overload. So when a person experiences periods of prolonged excessive stress, so not just minor stresses throughout the day, but stress for a long period of time where they're feeling overwhelmed, the stress response system, or the system that's responsible for fight, flight, or freeze, it can become kindled. And it goes into a state that we refer to as allostatic overload. So what kindled means is, going back to that real threat or perceived threat, when somebody experiences high amounts of stress, their brain normalizes that. So it becomes, it gets in a state of being wound up all of the time. And neuroception has the individual seeing danger everywhere, even when danger isn't actually there. This constant unconscious state of limbic arousal can actually activate the stress response system for absolutely no obvious reason. And it'll send the signal down to the brown brain. It'll shut down our homeostatic signals, because we really don't need to be able to experience pain or feel tired or be thirsty or hungry if we are going to die. So, and that really is what that system is. It is, I'm glad Becky's laughing at that. It is a very ancient system that was meant to keep us alive. So our brain goes, oh, you're in danger. You don't need all of these other systems that are burning energy. You need to be ready for fight, fight, or freeze. And that person will stay in that state almost all of the time. So 4 signs of allostatic overload are right in front of you, but what these might look like in the classroom is that child that perhaps is brushed by another child, and they break down into a meltdown saying so-and-so had pushed them. So in their mind, yes, somebody had brushed them, and that was more threatening to somebody who is not in a state of allostatic overload. Also, that over-the-top response. I know in kindergarten we do a how big is your problem? It's that idea that we are having an incredible meltdown for a very minor situation. You will find yourself walking on eggshells around this person because they're always ready to explode and you just don't want to set them off. And then the other sign is they have a really hard time getting back into that thinking brain after they've had a reaction to an incident. It's almost like that just sets them up for a bad day for the rest of the day. And I know many of us are experiencing these children in our classroom, and there's a really good reason for that. In our society, we have spent so much time living in a fast-paced world with so many stressors constantly bombarding us that many of us and our students have normalized this feeling of maybe not allostatic overload, but limbic arousal. So we start to settle down and get to a point of calm, and it's very uncomfortable for us. So we go searching to get back into that aroused state. Okay, so please excuse the title there. It shouldn't say 4 signs of allostatic overload. I'm just noticing that. It should say, how does our body deal with stress? This is another really great video that will demonstrate how our bodies react to stress. So it'll be in the chat stream again. This video is 2 minutes and 33 seconds.
So if you can do the check mark again as soon as you're done watching it, it'll probably be about 8:09. We'll come back together. Just give us a check when you're done.
Okay. I really like that video too, so thanks for the feedback there, Pam. I think it does a really great job explaining how our bodies deal with stress. So before we move on, I just want to review a couple of things that we've touched base on just to get us back in the mindset, because we are going to dig into stress a little bit more. Thinking back to that definition of stress, stress is anything that causes us to burn energy. So we have to remember that not all stress is negative stress. There are positive stresses in our life, and it's about trying to figure out which of those stressors are causing you to lose energy that you do not have to spend. Okay, let's get into the next slide. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some work straight from the Merit Center. What you're looking at right now is the 5 domains of self-regulation. So stressors, which is the same thing we refer to as stress, it's just 1 or 2 things, they are unique to every individual, and they're felt within these 5 basic domains. So the domains are biological, which refers to anything that's happening within our body, things like health, sleep. Our sensory input is a huge biological stressor. For students who have sensory processing problems, you can compound that even more. The emotion domain really refers more to recognizing and managing how major emotions either drain our energy or give us energy. It's not so much about the ability to label emotions or name emotions, but the awareness of how big emotions affect us. The cognitive domain really has anything to do with that prefrontal cortex, our ability to focus our attention, our ability to ignore distractions, to set goals, to persevere through challenging tasks. The social domain is really about understanding and engaging in social interactions. Being able to navigate yourself politely in a restaurant, making sure you stand in line at the grocery store, going to a friend's house for a party and doing small talk. All of those things are social stressors. And then pro-social stressors, which are a bit tricky for people. Pro-social stressors, that's a mouthful, they really deal with the idea of connecting with and caring about others. But also in that, one of the ways I really like to think about the pro-social domain is the opposite of pro-social is antisocial. So when we are dealing with other people's antisocial behaviors, that is a huge pro-social stressor for us. So as teachers, we really spend a lot of time in that pro-social stress state. We are constantly dealing with other people's stressors, and that can be really, really taxing on us. In fact, there are some people who are what we'd say super empathizers, and for them, even being near somebody who is not in a good state of mind can be completely draining for them. And I've met a number of people like that. Becky is actually one of them.
I'm shaking my head right
She
now.
is literally shaking her head, yes. So for those kind of people who really, really can sense other people's emotions, that pro-social stress, it's very, very intense for them. So really what Shanker Self-Reg teaches us is that in order to be able to maintain a level of optimal self-regulation, we need to become stress detectives in all 5 of these domains, because these domains are completely interconnected. If you are feeling a stressor in one domain, it is going to ping stressors off of other domains. So an example of that is, let's say you have had, report cards just ended. So you've had a really, really, really busy week writing all of your report cards. You stayed late that day at work because you had to get those last ones done because they were submitted soon. And then you were supposed to go to the gym that night, but you're so tired that biologically you're just not going to find that energy. So you're going to decide probably not to go to the gym. and you remembered that you were supposed to have a social dinner after the gym, and you go to it because you feel bad, but you're really not feeling that talkative because you're drained, which means you weren't listening to your best friend Sally when she was telling you all about her divorce, and you couldn't give her much advice because you really didn't have the energy to do that. And then you get home and your husband gives you bad news, and then you just break out into tears because you're so drained that you emotionally can't handle that one more thing.
I find that some days, even at the end of the day coming home from teaching, you walk in and one thing literally sets you like over the top. And I'm sure many of you feel that way too at the end of a teaching day when everything has just been taken from you. So what we'd like you to do now is to think about those 5 domains of stress. And we're going to ask you to use that text box tool and add some things that might be stressors in each of those domains. So when we're thinking about biological, we're thinking about hunger and thirst, lack of sleep, illness perhaps. When you're thinking about emotional, so your ability to recognize your emotions, your ability to regulate emotions, what might be causing you stress in those domains?
So what are some of those big emotions that are really draining for you?
Cognitive, so the ability to sustain and switch attention, thinking about tasks. So this is one where we see a lot at school, specifically with school-related tasks. Social, so thinking about perspective, your impact of your actions on others, like social relationships, and then pro-social, so empathy, connecting and caring with others. What we're going to ask Trish to do now is to put a link in the chat feature. So if you click there, it does give you examples in each of those 5 domains, but we would really love it if you could use the text box tool and add some of those underneath each of the domains there. And we'll talk about those in just a second. This is excellent. Please keep adding to that list. We'll stay here for a few more minutes. Absolutely, we don't even consider the things like our hormones that have an impact on our body and how that might be causing us stress. And we think about little people who don't even necessarily sometimes know how to express the stress that they're feeling, and how some of those things might be appearing here, and they won't even be able to give you the words to tell you how they're feeling or what is stressing them out. Being an introvert. Really loving the chat stream as well. So thinking about carpet time being too long is a huge stressor for our little bodies who are now putting all of their all of their energy into compliance, and now they have nothing left to give in order to learn a new skill. So that's very interesting.
Well, and to build on that, Becky, I think it's really important to talk about compliance. Compliance is a cognitive stressor. So if we are teaching and we want kids to have the absolute most energy available for learning, we want to consider how much compliance we're demanding.
Time of year can affect stressors too, absolutely. So now we're thinking about, as educators, considering all the things now on our to-do list, holiday concerts, we have family obligations, there's more work obligations. We're coming into school to our students who are stressed out, and not to mention the extra stresses on our students at this time of year. And just excitement alone is a huge stressor.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I noticed the negative chatting about students in the staff room. We had a big conversation. We just did a session at one of the schools on this about the idea of sliming, and that is exactly what that is. When you go into the staff room and then you just vent about everything that's bothering you, that's a real big pro-social stressor for everybody else in that staff room. So it might be restoring your energy by getting that off your chest, but in that attempt, how many people's energy are you stealing? So that's something to consider.
Just give one more minute for this. This is excellent. Trying to keep up. Oh my gosh, that's so true. I've been thinking personally as an educator, trying to keep up with all of the new learning that's happening. When you feel like you've just finally got yourself onto something, there's something new, brand new that you're supposed to be learning about. Yep, for sure. I find social media as well to be a pretty big stressor for me, pro-socially and also socially as well. Is that an actual term, sliming? Yes, it is. It's related to compassion fatigue. That's actually a term from compassion fatigue. Yeah. This
is fantastic. Yeah.
All of those, all of the things that you've added in the emotion domain too. So family issues. For sure. When you're dealing with something at home and then you have to come into the classroom all day and be on, oh, for sure. Yeah.
Classroom too visually stimulating and cluttered. That is a huge, huge stimulant within our classrooms. If you do visit, so Selfreg.ca is the Merit Center website, and they have some wonderful tools in there that'll help you assess your classroom and think about, could this possibly be overstimulating for some of our students?
Awesome, excellent. Yeah, and one of the biggest pieces to this entire puzzle is literally just being able to identify stress and how that might begin to impact us, but we can't figure out what might be impacting us if we can't identify the things that are stressing us out. So this is excellent. All right, we're going to move on because we do have a few more things that we want to get to, but this was excellent. Thank you, everybody. So there are 4 different types of stress that happen to us throughout the day. So overt stress is stresses that are obvious to us, right? So screaming children, that's a definite overt stress. We know it's right there. A car crash, things like that. Hidden stressors, those are a little bit harder to find. So they could be having to do with sensory process. They might give us an energy boost at first, but then they take our energy from us. So I think about things like coffee and junk food that give us a little bit of a boost right away, but in the end, they're really energy expensive, and they end up taking more. Then we have some negative stress, so it takes our energy reserves, but it doesn't necessarily improve our lives. So those are also things like junk food, right? It does deplete our energy reserves, but it doesn't improve our lives, as opposed to a positive stressor like exercise, which is also energy expensive, but it enhances our lives, and in the end, we are filled up.
Well, and even what you're doing right now is a positive stress. This is taking energy for you to sit here, process what we're saying, try to make sense of it, but in the end, hopefully you're going to know more about this, which will help you relieve stress in the long run. So that's really how you want to think about that.
And we'd love for you, again, to use that tool. And if you can add a couple of those things that you can think of that are overt stress, so things that are happening right away, hidden stressors. So you're going to come up with some things that we probably haven't even considered. Negative stresses and positive stresses. If you can add a few of those to the boxes, that would be fantastic. Yeah, excellent, for sure. Overt or unexpected interruptions during the school day definitely can be a stressor. For some, it stresses them out more than others. I appreciated the comment about the supply teacher being a social stressor. And I'm not sure if it was a supply educator who actually wrote that. I think about it in terms of, yep, it could for sure, as a supply educator going into a class, I was deeply stressed socially because I'm a pretty shy person. It's hard for you to tell that because I can't actually see you, so that's helping me tonight. But I'm a pretty shy person, so being a supply teacher going into an environment where I wasn't comfortable was an extreme social stressor for me. And then on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes it can be a stressor having a supply educator coming into your classroom, not because you don't trust them, but because it's somebody new in the classroom. So that can be stressful to the students, for sure, having somebody different in their class.
Well, and in addition to that, when you're not feeling well, the obligation of making sure you have a supply plan there, that can be very stressful as well. It's sometimes easier to just go into work than it is to make sure all your plans are there and together.
Yeah, and yeah, hoping the students were good, for sure, for the supply. Yeah, yoga. So I've recently become a hot yoga addict, and I never, ever liked yoga. I never really liked exercise, if I'm being totally honest with you, but I love hot yoga. It's an hour, and I find that I leave feeling relieved and rejuvenated. I feel like I've sweat, so I feel like I've worked out, and I literally have to shut my mind off in order to follow through the poses. So I find that to be I get a break for an hour no matter what, and I come back rejuvenated. And actually, it's at the end of the night, so I come back home feeling like I'm ready for bed, which is awesome. Doing a hobby you enjoy, yes.
So just to push your thinking a little bit on hidden stressors is probably where we do 90% of our stress detective work. Hidden stressors, when we talk about people perceive threat differently, that's a big key to hidden stressors. So if we think about, let's even say our little friends who have sensory processing disorders, or maybe are just a little more sensitive in some of their senses than others, we might not realize that the hum of the air conditioning is totally distracting for that child. I know one for me is sitting still. I cannot stand sitting still. So as soon as I'm sitting still, my leg starts bouncing or I'm fidgeting. So those hidden stressors are those things that we really have to dig for. We would have no idea that that was even a stress if we hadn't spent some time watching. And when we're thinking about hidden stressors for ourselves, those are those stressors that we have to be really reflective to start to understand. Like for Becky, she was not aware that other people's emotions had such a drain on her until she started doing this course. And now for her, that's an overt stress, but it was hidden for a long time. So we're really thinking about those stresses that we tend to ignore as long as we have enough energy to ignore them. Things like sights and smells and sounds, yes.
Yeah, it's so true. And things that, just like the comment that Tracy made, right? So one comment might cause, based on our stress, might have a different reaction to us. So we have no idea what might be causing somebody else stress. until we dig a little bit deeper, for sure. Ooh, sickness as a negative stress, yeah, definitely. Sugar, for sure.
Stress can set off vertigo. That's interesting. That makes sense.
It goes to show you too, right, just how interconnected the bodies are. And when we went back to those stress systems being where some systems in our body are turned off and some are turned on, I have a feeling that's directly related, absolutely, to vertigo.
Oh, that is such an amazing point. And we are going to get into that when we talk about how do we regulate stress, but we're going to talk about it right now just because that came up. So we have to be very, very, very aware that what one person finds stressful, another person won't find stressful, and vice versa. What one person finds restorative might be energy expensive for another person. And to add to that dynamic even more, what might be stressful for you on one day might not be stressful for you on another day, or what usually would restore you may not work based on where you're at. So there isn't a formula for this. There isn't an answer for this. In fact, one of the things that Stuart Shanker will always say is self-regulation is a process, not a program. So we can do all the work we want trying to figure out what these things are, but it's not always going to be 100% on for that day. So being in that state of curiosity, being in detective mode, and for ourselves, trying to become as self-aware as we can when it comes to what our body is feeling and how we're reacting to the experiences we're having.
So we're going to move on in the interest of time because we do have more things for sure that we want to cover. One of the biggest pieces of learning for me as part of my Shanker Self-Reg course through the Merit Center has been learning about the 9 major stressors. So what are the things that our students are coming in and dealing with? So thinking about, lack of sleep, not lack of sleep, or poor quality of sleep. Those are things that many of our students are dealing with. Lack of exercise. Urbanization. So this has been a big piece overall. People are moving from having space to moving into these small, crowded suburban neighborhoods, or urban neighborhoods, close by together. Nature deficit. Our students are not getting outside enough. They are not spending enough time outside in order for them to get that restorative benefit from it. Super stimulants, so thinking about coffee and junk food and sugar. Video games. This one is huge. So there's a lot of new research coming out on video games and for sure its impact on self-regulation. What we're noticing now is students are playing violent video games, but it doesn't have to be violent video games. And it's putting our body into fight or flight mode. So we don't recognize that a threat is perceived. So we see it as threat no matter what, even though it's not real. That's the way that our brain reacts, and we have no control over that. And our brain then is stuck in this fight or flight mode for 4 to 6 hours after we're done playing that video game. So you have a young child who's playing a violent video game or any video game and is stuck in that fight or flight mode. Then we're sending them to bed. Well, their body is in fight or flight, so they're not getting high quality sleep, which is leading us to that first major stressor, lack of sleep or poor quality sleep. So those things are like really impacting each other, and we're noticing a huge impact on that in the classroom for sure. Social media being another huge stressor, and that's maybe not with our youngest students, but for sure our teens and adults, and all of those social media aspects that we have to deal with, perceived perfection, all those things are really impactful. A lack of community. So now we've moved from walking outside and kids are playing outside with their friends all the time. Now you walk down the street or you drive down the street and there's nobody outside. Everybody's inside, doors are closed, windows are shut, and that's causing stress. And then, of course, family stress. So things happening in the family is stressing out our students. These are all coming back and related to each other. I noticed a few of the things in the chat stream, one of them being outside recess. Oh my gosh. So we don't take our kids outside when it's raining, and it's sad to see. First of all, I was lucky enough to be at a school where we could take our students outside in the rain, and it was magic. watching them run and jump and play in the rain was phenomenal for them, and it was restorative. They came back in and they were able to attend to tasks that we had asked them to do. So you're right. I think we need to rethink that for sure.
Yeah, well, and we have to remember that if we look at all of the 9 major stressors here, they really are a mismatch between our biology and our society. Primitively, we were born to be outside. Our biology is made up to be outside, walking for miles and miles and miles. So even just stepping foot within a building is a mismatch to our biology. So that's why all of these things are having such a huge effect on us, is because we were not made to have all of these things happening to us. Also, I noticed in there somebody had said something about video games being put away at least an hour before bedtime. If we think back to those first couple slides where we said as soon as your limbic system goes into a high state of fight, flight, or freeze, you become hyper alert for 4 to 6 hours after that fight, flight, or freeze. So really what Stuart Shanker would say is make sure there is no video games or TV happening 4 to 6 hours before they go to bed. With that said, could we all manage that? No, I'm guilty of it myself. My kids have their tablets until 6 o'clock and go to bed at 7:30. But if we really want to think about it, you're hyper alert for a good 4 to 6 hours.
And one of the things that we ask you to consider too with that is how are they reacting when you ask them to exit the video games or turn off the TV? Are they able to switch tasks and attend to what you're asking, or do they start to go into they blow up, easily go into meltdown mode?
Which is a sign of allostatic overload.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right? Like what Deborah said before, it helps to explain so much. It really, really does. We think about the little guys who maybe they wake up in the morning and they play video games, and that's not a judgment. It's just
reality.
That's a reality, right? Parents have to get ready. You're rushing around in the morning. They're playing their video games and they're not in your hair. But now they're in fight or flight mode coming into your classroom, and what impact can that have in your classroom?
I will try and find that for you, Patricia, and give you a more direct link. Just let us go through the first couple the next couple slides, and then we'll see if we can get you that link up by the end of the presentation.
And if not, maybe we'll ask Trish to put it up later on. If you get, I think she develops a list of all the links. There is one called an environmental checklist, but we'll make sure we get it to you for sure.
Okay, so let's use the bucket analogy that we had back in the How Does Our Body Manage Stress and take a look at how we manage energy states. So what you're seeing on the left there is, oh, there's a spelling error there too. Got bumped over. You're looking at an empty bucket. So when our bucket is empty, we are out of energy. That's what we refer to as a hypoactive state. So in the classroom, this would be the child that's having a hard time getting motivated, getting anything done, or they're just kind of flopped on a pillow and don't really want to move all day. When we're feeling sick, that's really that hypoactive state. It's that feeling of dragginess. I need more energy in order to get things done. On the right there, the full bucket, that's what we would consider the hyperactive state. So our bucket is overflowing with energy. And those are the kids who seem to be bouncing off the roof, or they're yelling, or they're running around, or you can just tell that they're having a harder time sitting still. So that is a hyperactive state. And the middle, when you see the water is somewhere within that bucket, is our range of optimal self-regulation. So we are not either empty or full. There is some range around that, but what we need to be aware of is that as we are going further from the range of optimal self-regulation, whether it be hypoactive or hyperactive, we are more active in our limbic system and less active in our prefrontal cortex. So the way that's a really nice way to think about this is if you think of a balance scale, and you have your hypoactive on one state and your hyperactive on another. So if you are cognitively stressed, your limbic system can manage, like it monitors your blood glucose levels. And when your blood glucose gets to a certain level, it will start to shut down your learning brain and vice versa. So if you are in learning brain but then are threatened by something, oh wait, that's the same. If you are if you're in learning brain and you feel threat of something, then you are going to be going more towards your limbic side than your prefrontal cortex. So really what I'm trying to say here is as stress goes up, learning goes down, but as soon as you hit fight, flight, or freeze, limbic system completely hijacks prefrontal cortex and learning brain shuts down.
And thanks so much, Trish, for posting the checklist. Absolutely, that's where you get it. I was giggling while Crystal was talking because a stressor for her is when slides aren't perfect. That is a real stressor.
A real stressor.
So it makes me laugh. I have lots of stressors myself. That's just not one of them.
Okay, so this is where things get a little bit tricky. So when you are in a hypoactive state and you need to up-regulate, which means I want to restore energy, put energy back in my bucket so I can hit a state of optimal self-regulation, these are some strategies that can help you do that. We're going to have Trish post, there are 2 links here that you can follow that are going to take you right to 2 forms that say, one will say ways to restore energy and one will say ways to reduce energy. With that said, you really don't have to visit them right now because both of them look just like this. And there's a very good reason for that. That is because what one person might find restorative, another person might find will help them, will make them more anxious. So for example, I have a 6-year-old son who, like me, is a ball of energy. And I was called into his classroom to have a meeting with his teacher. And we had a big conversation about how when he gets on the carpet at middle carpet break, he's rolling around on his head and he can't seem to get himself centered and sit for carpet time. And he said, okay, could you tell me a little bit about what's happening before that carpet time? And she informed me that they were all doing yoga so they could relax, so they were ready to do the morning message or whatever the circle time was. And what I know about my son is, just like me, sitting still for him is actually a stressor. So it made complete sense to me that after him being forced to sit through 20 minutes of yoga, that he did not have the energy left to sit through another 10-minute circle. Yet Becky finds yoga completely restorative. So we have to be really careful, but we also have to be willing to test things out. Because especially with our younger ones who aren't so self-aware and aren't able to say, oh, a hug is what makes me feel better, we have to do that detective work and really watch their body. After a hug, does this child tense up or do they seem to relax? After we come in from recess, is this child wound up or are they calm? Because if they're wound, then open areas plus physical activity plus lack of control or lack of structure might be overwhelming for that child. Yet another child might just need to get outside and run around.
Yeah, so if there's one thing that we take from that, is just to keep in mind that what works for one won't work for all. It absolutely won't. And what works for one day might not work for that same one the next day.
Yes, there are a lot of tools out there that can help you help children figure out what these strategies are for them. I think the trick is, though, after they've tried the strategy, that we are with them talking through and trying to identify how they're feeling afterwards. Okay, so a child you were working with lashes out physically at somebody, they dump the desk in the room, and then they run from the room. So we've all been there, but before questioning why you ever got into teaching for the first place, what do we do? I'm sure that most of you can relate to this situation, and if it's not this situation exactly, I'm sure there are other similar ones that will jump to your mind. We have to keep in mind that being an educator is challenging normally, but then when we add challenges of special needs, mental health issues, behavior issues, these situations can become more frequent and more intense. So what Shanker Self-Reg helps us to understand is that there is a difference between stress behavior and misbehavior. In misbehavior, a child actually has the ability to make the choice of what they're doing. In a stress behavior, it is a natural reaction. And I really want to put it out there that I genuinely believe from the bottom of my heart that if you look back far enough, you will notice that all behavior is in one way or another stress behavior. So that really is the first step of Shanker Self-Reg, is being aware that misbehavior and stress behavior are not the same thing. So when you have a child that has given you that reaction, you as an educator need to ask yourself, why this behavior and why now? There's a really nice little graphic that we took from the Merit Center website here that kind of gives us an idea of the difference in those mindsets. So when we are reframing the behavior, we are really looking at the can't lens. And this really is a perception between the self-control paradigm and the self-reg paradigm. And what I mean by that is, I remember when I said for many decades all of our research was based off of the idea that we could only see the prefrontal cortex, and we believed that the prefrontal cortex was running the show. We've now discovered that the prefrontal cortex is not necessarily running the show, and as soon as a limbic response happens, the prefrontal cortex will completely shut down, which means it's not a matter of the child won't listen, it's a matter of the child can't listen. So as adults, when we're in the self-control paradigm, we're really thinking won't. We're really judgmental. We believe that the children are willful and defiant, that they're lazy, that they don't want to try hard enough. And the way to fix that is to start doing rewards or punishments. And that really leads children to feel frustrated or guilty or shameful. When we reframe that behavior and start to think of it as a can't behavior, we end up taking the approach of being the curious adult. We start thinking, oh man, this child is really experiencing too many stressors, and we need to figure out what those are. What is getting in the way of this child being able to think and learn? And that really helps children feel supported and strengthened. And if we think about that from a grown-up perspective, if you're working with a boss that constantly is telling you everything you're doing wrong, you're probably less likely to want to improve. However, if that boss were to come to you and say, oh, I can tell you're not performing up to your usual standard. Is there anything I can do to help you feel less stressed? You're probably going to be more likely to want to work towards being a better employee.
And so absolutely. And what a couple of people have said in the chat stream is that behavior equals communication.
Yes.
Absolutely. And what we're going to get into now is how important relationship is in relation to that. You can't understand that behavior and how the child is communicating without first having a relationship with that child. And when we think about our kindergarten program being 4 frames, and we should have asked this first, how many of you are kindergarten educators, but 2 frames of our program, belonging and contributing and self-regulation and well-being, are directly related to those relationships and the importance of doing that. And it doesn't matter if you're a kindergarten educator. We all know this in kindergarten to grade 12. If you don't spend time developing relationships and community with your class first, you know you're in trouble as the year goes on. Then you are forced, not forced, but then you tend to take more of that self-control, won't mindset, as opposed to can't, because you haven't spent time building those relationships.
And just to build on that even a little bit further, when we're talking about fight, flight, or freeze, or limbic arousal, the one thing that research is showing is if you don't have a safe and secure relationship with that child, more than likely you will not be successful in being able to turn off that child's limbic alarm. The only thing that helps soothe an limbic alarm is relationship.
And that brings us to the next slide.
So we're going to give you a minute to read that slide. We won't read it to you, but think about as you read it, which educator am I here? And we have to remember we all have bad days. So what we really want you to do is be kind to yourself. As educators, we really have to start reframing our own behaviors as stress behaviors. Because if we think back to limbic resonance, if you are dysregulated, you are dysregulating the students within your classroom. So for the sake of the relationships with your students and yourself, you have to take a moment and pause and reframe. Often both you and your students will be in allostatic overload, especially if you're being approached in a state of allostatic overload. If a kid comes to you wound, our immediate response is to be wound. So you will react with a heightened limbic response to someone else's heightened limbic response. So we have to practice pressing the pause button. And that won't happen immediately, but you get better and better at doing it the more you pause and reframe behavior. And you can do this with everybody. You can do it with the woman at the drive-thru, you can do it with your husband, your kids, your students, yourself.
Crystal and I do it to each other
all the time. So taking that moment to pause and reframe really can help your students turn a negative spiral into a positive spiral. During one of Stuart's lectures, he said something that has always struck with me. He said, teachers are an incredible resource for two reasons. One being that they are trained professionals, but the other being that they have the opportunity to be with the child for 1,000 hours a year. That quote really stuck with me, and as I pondered it, I realized that we as teachers, we're not only with one child for 1,000 hours a year, we are with up to 30 children for 1,000 hours a year. And most teachers teach for 25 to 30 years. So if we add that all together, oh my goodness, what an incredible opportunity we have to change the future of student well-being for the better.
Yes. Andrea asked a question about reframing. So what exactly does that mean? And we're going to get into that. That's really the first step of Shanker Self-Reg. And basically what we're saying is we understand that it's not, that you're not doing this to be against me. What we're saying is you are experiencing stress right now. So your reaction towards me is not, is a result of stress on your part. And so we're going to understand that and look at that child with soft eyes as opposed to approach them, again, with, as Krista is saying, with kind of an angry reaction.
Actually, I think digging into this will help you understand that a little bit. So we do have a link that's going to go up in the chat stream there. If you are able to open that up, it might be really helpful in you understanding what we're going to get into next. So the slide that was up here is the 5 steps of Shanker Self-Reg. So really what we want to be aware of is when we see a child who is having a stress reaction or when we're having a stress reaction ourselves, these are the steps that we want to go through. The rubric that has just been put up there is arranged sort of on a continuum from I am learning about, which is really the I'm a beginner in self-reg, so this is what I'm just starting to practice, all the way to in my everyday life, I am a master at this. So keep that and use this within your classroom to try and help yourself understand what are those steps that I want to go through. The other thing that I think is important for you to know is the idea that these are not linear steps. I know that they're set at step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but you might enter in at any one of those steps and you're going to go back and forth through all of them in a circular motion.
And really our goal today was to give you that understanding that what is stress, what does that look like, and how does that impact your brain? And we are hoping, we're hoping that this will lead to another session where we can dig deeper into these 5 steps and now start to look at how does that change our classroom practice. So even reframing, using that first step of thinking that this behavior is not, so for example, on this one here, I hate you, you are the worst teacher ever. Thinking about that not as I'm taking offense to it and I'm going to react to you in a negative way and give you a consequence. I'm going to try and discover what it is that's causing you that stress and reframe it right away to say this is a stress behavior. It is not a misbehavior that you are purposely doing to hurt me. No child comes into school any day purposely trying to hurt you. That's just not the way children work. So they're experiencing stress, and that's where this is coming from.
And when we think about this phrase actually meaning, it doesn't mean I hate you, you are my worst teacher ever. It actually means I am experiencing so much stress right now that I can't handle it. I need you to help me. Mm-hmm. And when we think about it like that, it helps us really get behind the behavior. The behavior is a symptom of something else. And it's very much the same thing with aggressive behavior. So when you're seeing aggressive behavior, you want to reframe that the exact same way you'd reframe verbal outbursts. That's that child's way of saying, I am completely stressed out here and I don't have the capability to deal with it right now.
Oh, and Deborah, absolutely. When they're dysregulated, they absolutely need our help the most. This is where our work is most important, and our response to that really does impact the behavior the next time. And it doesn't mean that we are giving, that we're allowing children to get away with it. That absolutely doesn't mean it. What we're saying is that we recognize that the emotions that you're experiencing right now are so important that we're going to value that and help you to work through that before we just react with a consequence, perhaps.
And the fact of the matter is, if we don't turn off that limbic alarm, they're not learning anything from the experience anyway. So the real trick is to get them calm and then talk about other ways they could have handled that.
Oh, Kathleen, and you know what, Kathleen, I would encourage you to head towards the Merit Center website as well to think about how we have those conversations with parents. It starts with us, for sure, in looking at children's behavior differently and recognizing stress, but we absolutely have to start sharing that message with the families as well, because we know our children are stressed out.
And there is a great infographic that you could send home for parents that you can print off for free right off their website that gives them that brief understanding of what self-regulation is, because it really is essential that we all have a good understanding of this.
And this, we want to leave you with this graphic, and we'll head straight to a graphic about the book. But when you see a child differently, you see a different child. So when we start to look at those children with, we call them soft eyes, when we look at them differently, not as misbehaving, but as displaying stress behavior, you really do, that relationship strengthens because you understand why what's happening is happening. And it helps you to develop stronger relationships with your students, for sure.
So what you have here is a few resources that come straight from Stuart Shanker and the Merit Center. So this is the exact same book. You see two different things here. One is hardcover, one is softcover. Pretty sure the softcover is only, I think it's under $18 now. It is a fabulous read that will help you dig deeper into this. And also the Merit Center website has been put up there for you too.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for tonight. Please send us emails at any point. I'll ask Trish if she can maybe pop our emails back, and actually I'll do it myself right now, and we'll let Trish come back on. And the piece about ELLs and self-reg is huge, and that's something that we're learning about ourselves. So absolutely, we can keep the conversation going. Thanks, everyone.
Wow, that was terrific. And my goodness, participants, you were amazing as well, too. Great conversation in the chat and on the slides. And I couldn't agree more. We certainly would like to have future sessions in these topics. And I also want to say that terrific connections for not just Kindy World, but for everybody. I was thinking about staff room things and classes I've taught before or walked into now. Really wonderful. Thank you so, so much for that terrific presentation, Becky and Crystal. So here's your chance, folks. Let's give them some feedback here. It's really important to us. Yes, I second the part 2, that's for sure. This is an active link for you right now on the screen, but I'll also put it in the chat as well. It's a quick survey. Once you've done this survey, then that triggers a certificate that you can have, and then that's a link to the resources that'll be up tomorrow. My other job is I'll be posting those on the website, and then you will all get an email with a link to those resources, plus the recording. So if you want to go and listen to it again, you certainly can, or if you want to suggest it to somebody else to have a listen, that's a great idea. So I'll leave those links in the chat. This is a quick reminder that there is $450 still available from OTF. That's a subsidy for AQ courses in the area of mathematics, technology, or kindergarten. Please take advantage of that if you need to. So I don't have a list of upcoming sessions for you because they haven't quite all been posted on our link yet. So do check in over the holidays and find out what's coming up next. I know that there are a whole lot in the works, and with your feedback, then that'll help drive some of what we are doing. So at this point, I am going to stop the recording. You'll hear that happen in a moment, and ask you to head to the feedback.